Are there things that go on in your world that tick you off, that start a process of thinking and behavior that you're not happy with? Well, that's because you're human and because you are an emotional being, as we've talked about many times before. So stick with me, because this week I want to help you to understand those things so that we can use them to shift the behavior. Hi, this is Grant Herbert, VUCA Leadership and Sustainable Performance Coach, and today I want to continue our conversation around all things emotional intelligence in the second quadrant of self-management by helping you to identify your triggers. By the way, if you're watching this on the video, or indeed you can see it on the thumbnail if you're listening to this on the podcast, I'm wearing my Are You OK clothes today. Today here, as I've started this in Australia, it's the 1st of July, and I have started working with this charity to help raise awareness and to raise some funds for Are You OK Day. I'm doing Ks for Are You OK? And it's all about me doing a lot of kilometres that I commit to, and then people sponsor me and the money goes to a good cause. Are You OK is all about a conversation that could change your life. And simply by asking that question to other people and then listening with all the intention that we've talked about before, to be able to support them in any way that you can. So let me ask you, are you okay? And by the way, you can find a link down below and get involved and help me out to help this cause as well. All right, so triggers are those things that happen that push the buttons that lead to a shift in the behavior. And for me, a big trigger is traffic. Now, by the way, I live in Sydney and the traffic's not as bad here as I thought it was. When I started traveling around the world, I realized that, going to places like Mumbai and Bangalore and other places throughout Asia, that the traffic here is pretty calm. But it wasn't the traffic itself. It wasn't indeed even being stuck in the traffic. It's what I made that mean, what I interpreted that as going to produce in terms of a result. And then it took my thinking and my behavior off track. Now, by the way, I don't do a lot of traffic anymore unless I'm sitting in the back and someone else is driving, because with the way I work today, I don't need to do that. However, I had to develop strategies to shift the behavior because it wasn't good for me. It wasn't good for others, and it certainly wasn't good for the greater good. So if that is something that bothers you, that's great. However, what I want to do is help you to identify the things that tick you off, that start you on that process that leads to poor behavior. All right. So it's a 5-step process of self-awareness. And we're going to get this awareness today so that we can take it into next week. And I will teach you a strategy to be able to take back control of that behavior. Remember, we are not managing the emotion. We are managing the response to the emotion. So we need this awareness so that we can then develop a strategy to do that. All right, let's go. Number 1 is identify the triggers. So for me, it was traffic. And there are other things that trigger poor behavior, or more particularly did trigger poor behavior. Now that I have a little bit more awareness, I'm able to mitigate that a lot differently these days. There are things that do make me think and behave in a way that is not conducive to the results that I want. Other things like people being late and people telling lies, whatever it is, there are many things that will trigger the behavior. So step 1 is for you to identify the trigger that starts behavior. Now, it's ideal if we can come up with a list of a half a dozen things. However, for this exercise, I want you to identify one, just like I did, being stuck in traffic. So identifying it gives you a start point. It lets you know that this is what I need to work on. Now that we have recognized the trigger, now what we need to do is notice the physiology. Remember, we've talked about the fact that an emotion is physical. It's a physiological cue and clue that something's going on in your world. So when that trigger is fired, how do you know in your body? What's the physiological change that you can sense in your body? So for me, in traffic, I could sense me getting tense across my shoulders. And just as you're seeing here, it's because I was hanging onto the steering wheel. Right? I could feel myself tensing up. So what is it for you when that trigger is pushed? What goes on physically for you? Number 3 is to audit the psychology. So first we have the trigger, that then we have the physiological sensation of the emotion. Now we want to look at what goes on from there in the thoughts. What did you make that mean? And that whole process around your beliefs and your values and everything that goes on in that internal dialogue that is in the gap between that initial trigger and the behavior. So for me, in traffic, I would have a conversation going on around the fact that I'm going to turn up late. And I don't like to be late, because if I'm late, that means they will think this about me, or whatever it was. So the psychology and understanding what's going on is really, really important. So the next part of the process is for you to do an audit on that. And I love the word audit because, as I've talked about before, it's a logical word. So when you're doing an audit, you're not asking why, you're just asking what. So what am I thinking here? What do I normally ruminate on? What thoughts come into my mind? What beliefs are coming in here? So we're gathering data. We're not going deep down into the emotion of it. Okay, now that we've identified the trigger and we know physically what's going on, and we've done an audit of our thoughts and all the psychology that's going on, now what we need to do is evaluate the behavior. So when that trigger is pushed and you go through that thought process and that internal dialogue goes on, what do you normally do? So for me, it was a case of hitting the horn. So someone might be, at the traffic lights, 4 cars in front of me, and they go green and they didn't move immediately. So I'm thinking, haven't we got a color you like? And I might even say that out loud and they can't hear me. And I might bip the horn or whatever it is. So there's the behavior that came from that initial trigger. So as you can see, by taking us through this process now, we are step by step breaking it down to work out why and how we got to this behavior. So looking at your trigger that you've chosen for this exercise, what do you normally do? And make a note of that. Call it out for what it is, and have a recognition that it was this trigger that led to this behavior with all this psychology in the middle. Now that we've gone through the first 4 steps, number 5 is to name the feeling. So remember, as we talked about emotions are firstly physiological, sensation in your body, a cue, a clue to let you know that something's going on in your world. It's what you make that mean and how you interpret that, and the psychology that you go through that then creates a feeling that you choose to feel. From there, the feelings can escalate or they can go down. The intensity is totally up to you based on what's going on in that psychology, and it can shift really, really quickly. So now in this 5th step of the process, I want you to name how you feel. So if I go back to my traffic example, right, I would feel frustrated. And the frustration was because it was out of my control. Barring me doing something really, really crazy and emulating something I'd seen on a car chase or something of just pushing my way through traffic. There's nothing I could do. And that created frustration based on the fact that I thought I was going to be late, which led to me dipping down into my mini-me thought patterns, making it mean that they're going to think this about me. So I'm bipping the horn and going outside my normal behaviour of how I want to behave, and now I feel frustrated. The other part of naming the feeling is, how does it make you feel when you do behave that way? So that frustration was also frustration with myself for allowing something like traffic to take over and control my behaviour. So there you have it, a 5-step process to get awareness, to be able to identify your trigger, to be able to then shift into understanding what goes on physiologically, psychologically, what you do, and then how that makes you feel. With that information, we'll be able to then go into next week and look at how we can put together a different strategy so that we can circumvent and change some of the things that happened in that process so that we can then get a different behavior, a behavior that's more positive, a behavior that gives you the result that you want. Remember, there's no such thing as a negative emotion. It's just negative behavior, dependent upon what you interpret that emotion to be and the psychological process you take it through. Every single emotion is there to teach you something about what's going on in your world right now. It's positive. It's what you do with that emotion that can make the difference. Well, that's it from me for another week. Join me again next week as we continue this conversation around self-management by developing a strategy for behavioural self-control. I'll see you then.